There are many seminaries that do not any longer require Greek and Hebrew as part of their programs. And sometimes I think people looking at Westminster say, oh boy, that's a definite deterrent. I really don't want to do Greek and Hebrew. I think I'll go somewhere else where I don't have to learn those things. And that's perfectly valid. But I think it's really important to study the Greek and Hebrew. It was part of the founding documents of Westminster that would be part of the program. And it has remained so to this day. But why? Okay, we have English and other translations, whatever your native language is. Hopefully there is a translation of the Bible in it. If not, and you come from somewhere in the world where you don't have a Bible in your language and you're here, I'm really impressed and I would love to talk to you. But probably wherever you came from, there's a Bible in your language. And the translations are trustworthy. We can trust our English Bibles, Spanish Bibles, Russian Bibles, whatever they are. So that is important, I think, to know and to assure people, Christians everywhere, you can trust your Bible that's in your translation in your language. But translation is definitely not an exact science, like chemistry or calculus or all those things that I stay away from. It's not like you put in a word in this language and you press this little formula button and out comes the right word in the target language. It requires decisions and judgment calls often. Now sometimes you'll have a clause, phrase, verse that's completely straightforward, and anybody coming to the text would say that's really clear. This means this, okay? And that's great, and there are lots of those, okay? But there are also lots that are not quite that clear. And there may be, two ways that you can take a certain word or a certain turn of phrase. Or there might be a play on words. Okay, John is famous for that. So when he says, you must be born anothen. Anothen can mean again. It can mean from above. So which one did he mean there? Well, maybe he meant both. Okay, maybe he intended to use that word that means both of those things. But if you're translating the Bible, you have to pick one or the other. Now sometimes, some translations, like the ESV, is good about putting one in the text and then putting the other in the footnote, which is great, because then the reader in the target language can say, oh, isn't that cool? It sort of means both of those things. Okay, so that's neat. But you don't always have the option of using lots of footnotes to explain every choice that you made and what the other possible choices were that you couldn't put in the text. Sometimes you'll have a term in the original language that is just tremendously rich. So for instance, in Dutch, there's this term gezellig. And there's so much that goes into that word. If you have friends over, okay, you have half a dozen friends over, and you have this great evening, and you have good food, and you listen to great music and great conversation, and it's just fun, and you feel bonded together, and you just feel like, oh, this was great. I'm so glad we did this. I feel closer to all these people at the end of the evening. That was a gezellig evening. So what word are you going to use to translate that? Well, cozy does part of it. Intimate, warm, fun, full of life, bonding. It's all those things go into the term gezellig. But if you're just making a translation and you have to pick one of those words, you do the best you can, but you're missing so much. And whereas if you live in the Netherlands and you hang out with a bunch of Dutch people and you learn to speak Dutch, and somebody says, oh, that was gezellig, you know what they mean. And it's the whole picture, it's all the baggage just in that term. And there are terms like that in many languages. There are some in Hebrew. I would say chesed is one of those. It means covenant faithfulness, and it means steadfast love, and it means trustworthiness, and it means loyalty, and it means all those things. But you just got to pick one of them in any given text that you're translating. You have to say, well, it means all those things, but I'm going to pick this as the most prominent of them for this passage. And then you're translating on somewhere else, and you say, oh, here's chesed again. Well, I think that sort of the nuance that rises to the surface as the most important here is this one, so I'm going to go with that word. But the whole package is there in the Hebrew. When you see chesed, it means all those things wrapped up into one big bundle. So your English translation is fine, whichever, it may, your loving kindness endures forever, your steadfast love, whatever, that's absolutely fine. It's completely trustworthy. But it's also missing something. it's missing some of that richness. And if you're reading the Bible in English or whatever language, and here you see steadfast love, and here you see covenant faithfulness or something like that, it doesn't immediately occur to you that it's the same Hebrew word behind those things. And so you don't always make the same kind of connections just reading the English that you would if you were reading the Hebrew and you say, wow, it's the same word here and here. Okay, so translations are absolutely trustworthy. They are fine, they are sufficient. But often there's so much more there that you can pick up on if you can read it in that original language. And so I would say not every Christian needs to read Hebrew, but some Christians need to read Hebrew and Greek so that they can bring that richness to the church. And it seems to me that church leaders of all kinds, pastors, counselors, whoever, if you can go to the Hebrew and the Greek original and draw out that richness to feed to people, that's really important. And I think that's part of why Westminster has continued to say, no, this is important for church leaders to know how to do this. So and let me back up, I wrote myself a few notes this morning. Sometimes there are things that you simply cannot bring across in a translation. It just doesn't work. For instance, in the second semester of Hebrew this summer, we're reading through the first 3 chapters of Judges. And there's some things going on there where the author used the actual structure of the grammar to make some points. Okay, so there's, in this particular sentence, blah, 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 and the subject of the sentence is all the way at the very end. And that's significant. He's actually making a very subtle comment on that, actually it's actually a whole tribe, by the fact that he's mixed up the expected grammar. It's not your usual way to construct a sentence, and he's put him all the way at the end, and it's making a little kind of a tongue-in-cheek judgment about the person whose name shows up at the end of the sentence. You can't bring that into English. You could do it in Greek or Latin, I think, probably in German, languages where you can put a case ending on a word, and then wherever it shows up in the sentence, it's clear this is the subject. But you actually can't do it. We tried. We tried and tried, and you just cannot do that in English. In that particular sentence, the only way to communicate it is you have to have the subject at or near the beginning. And so the sense of the sentence comes across just fine, but you don't get the little subtle thing the author was doing with the text by putting the subject at the end. So there are things that you miss. And in poetry, oh my goodness. I mean, translating poetry from any language to any language